I want to start off by saying that I am a refugee to this country. I came to America as a Jewish refugee from the former Soviet Union, Uzbekistan. So I think that sets the tone.
Thank you for being here, Stella Escobedo. We are going to dive right in. Are you doing today what you thought you would be doing when you were 16 years old?
Absolutely not. I mean, yes and no. My friends always said, gosh, Stella, you always ask a lot of questions. So no matter where we went, I always asked questions. It's funny, like even if we were in a taxi because we didn't have Ubers back then, you know what I'm saying? Wherever we were, I was always inquisitive. So my friends thought maybe, you should be an FBI agent. You should be like some kind of investigator. And then, like 2 years down the road, I was like, oh, you know what? No, actually, it was 16. Yeah. Like when I was like, you know what? I think I want to do journalism.
Mm.
And then, anyway, as my career progressed and everything, where I am today is not where I would like even 3 years ago, where I thought I would be. So success is, you and I talked about this a little bit. It's never like this. If it doesn't do this, you're not doing something right.
Yeah, maybe I would even say if it's not doing that, we're not taking the risks. We're not
Yes.
pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone. So let's go through to bring everybody up to speed. You're not actually doing what you thought you'd be doing at 16, but given the way that you were living and your curiosity and your inquisitiveness, it makes sense that you're a journalist. And it makes sense that we should point out that you are a Emmy award winning journalist, which I think is good to acknowledge. And I want to dive into, you said life looks different over these past few years, and you've had some transitions within your career. I think it'd be really helpful, since on this Do It podcast, it really is about class being in session and people learning tools and things that they can apply into their life right away. We've got lots of listeners and viewers that are navigating different career paths or wanting to take that leap to try something different, whether it's right across, in the same field, or maybe taking a leap to something totally different. Can you speak a little bit about your recent career journey, and then some tips you think would be helpful for that person who's also going through a transition of their career?
So I want to start off by saying that I am a refugee to this country. I came to America as a Jewish refugee from the former Soviet Union, Uzbekistan. So I think that sets the tone. Coming from a different country, being here as an immigrant, and it was always really important, first of all, work hard. When we came to America, my parents always said, you got to work hard. Nothing is given to you. So anyway, when I ended up deciding on going to become a journalist, I got accepted at USC, which has a good broadcast journalism program. And I started on my journey. I started working in mainstream media in local news, which took me to, places all across the nation. I started in Butte, Montana, where I interviewed Evel Knievel. I worked in Bozeman, Montana. From Bozeman, I went to Palm Springs. From Palm Springs, I went to Phoenix. From Phoenix to Tucson. And it was and I spent years in a place, anywhere from 5 years to 7 years. And then I grew up in Los Angeles. That's where my family is. And then my husband and I, when we met, we had our first daughter in Tucson. I ended up moving to California, where I worked as in San Diego, where I worked as a morning anchor at one of the stations. And my life took a different turn when I did not agree with some of the coverage that was happening in some of the mainstream media outlets, because when we went to journalism school, we're told that you're supposed to report both sides. And this is where I have my frustration sometimes, where I feel like the local news takes a stance. And I don't think that I know that that's not what journalism is all about, which we will talk about. How do you get your news, right? Especially in an age of social media, TikTok. Anyway, so I ended up leaving local news. I went to a station where it's more national, One America News. And now, we do predominantly stuff online. But if you asked me 3 years ago, would you be here? I would say never, because mainstream media was my life. But when you start looking at things through a different lens, and things change, when you have kids and you have a husband and your priorities change, that. And what matters to you, what stories matter to you, where your kids go matters to you. It's just your life takes a different turn. So to answer your question, no, I never thought in a million years that, I'd be sitting here with you on a
Mhm.
podcast, or I'd
Yeah.
probably be still anchoring the morning show somewhere. But I love it. It was a tough decision to make. It was very hard. It was also a very tough schedule to work because, being a mom of two girls and having to wake up at, 2 o'clock in the morning was not ideal for me either. But
Mhm.
now in a day and age where mainstream media doesn't rule the media, there are so many different outlets. It's a blessing to people like us who want a good balance as well,
Mhm.
right? Like, you want to be able to, you know how they say, like, women, we can have it all. We can have the career, we can have the
Yeah.
family. I mean, yeah, and it's hard, you know what I'm saying?
I don't think that's true. I think it's,
Yeah.
maybe you can have it, not all at the same time.
No,
Not all
something
at the
has
same
to
time.
give, right?
Mhm.
So if you're putting a lot into your work, into your career, then you're not giving it to your family. You're not giving it
Mhm.
to your kids. You're not giving it to your husband. So there's a balance, and working a 9 to 5, it's very, very hard when you're taking, and with work like that, you also take a lot of it home with you with preparations and everything. It's a lot.
Mhm. I have a couple follow-up questions to this. One is, you made a switch from a well-known name brand station to
Mhm.
one that maybe was not as well known.
Yes.
Does that, this is a leading question. I want to talk about ego, about when we make adjustments or we shift things sometimes. And the ego is like, well, I don't know if that's as good, or I don't know if this is going, what people are going to think, because maybe the bigger name is better in quotes. Uh, Maybe people are going to think something because of what people think of this other company
Yes.
or this other thing. Did you wrestle with any of that? And how did you
Yeah.
get through
No.
that?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question to ask. So yes, those are thoughts. Those are things that I thought about, but it was really about what I thought was the right thing to do, not what was labeled as the best.
Hmm.
And so once I made the transition, I ended up meeting people that I would have never met on the other side. I ended up meeting like I have such an amazing group of moms who I
Mm,
have become friends with in California, who are fighting the education system, who are fighting certain things that they're not happy with the governor. I'm not getting political, but they're just not happy with things.
mhm,
But their voice was not heard in this different platform. And now I've been able to give them that voice. And it's been the most rewarding thing because they really lean on somebody like me because they don't have that in the
mhm.
mainstream world, which is what mattered to me too at this point in my life. So yes, you have this big name, but yes, you go to something that is maybe less heard of, but the value for me right
Mm,
here, and then social media added to that. Like when I left mainstream media, for example, I had like 15,000 followers on Instagram. Okay. I'm up to 60 now in a year, in like a year. It just goes to show who you're starting to resonate with. I got a platform. I have a big platform on TikTok. It was crazy because I'm like, wow, you have this thing that has this big name and shiny stars all over it. But on social media, it really wasn't resonating. So there's a need. I think there's a need and there's a
mm,
hunger for stories that are not being told. And I'm so happy that I could be that voice, even if it's not popular.
mhm. I also would say, I bet, Stella, that you didn't know that was what was going to happen when you made the shift.
No, but you know what? I had lots of conversations with my sister. My sister's a therapist. She's so smart. She has her master's degree. And we've had these conversations before. And I'm like, but what if X, Y, and Z happens? But what?
Mhm.
And she says, but what if it's the best decision you've ever made? And she was right. She was right.
So,
It's the best decision I've ever made. And I think my biggest advice to people is take that risk. What if it's the best decision you ever make?
and I would say, don't you think you learned how to quiet the
Yeah.
outside noise?
You
And
ask great questions, Sarah. Yes, that's literally it. I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday where it was like, I, making the transition, you heard all this loud noises and
Mhm,
people were, some people didn't say nice things to me, like, oh my gosh, you gave up your career, you threw your was somebody once told me, oh, you flushed your USC broadcast journalism degree down the toilet, you're no longer credible. It's like, well, I didn't change, like my ethics, my standards don't change, but okay.
Yeah.
um but so I struggled with that in the beginning, and then now that I've gone through that hurdle, there's nothing you can say to me, there's
Mm.
nothing you can say to me that actually will rattle me. You know what I'm saying? Along those lines, because I know what I'm doing is right. And I know what I'm resonating with people because there is a void and I'm filling that void.
Are you more in the flow right now in your work, in your career than maybe
Yeah,
you were? Okay.
100%. Especially with the whole anti-Semitism thing that is going
Mhm.
on. I need a voice because mainstream media has taken a different approach. They have taken approach on when there's two sides. Well, how do you legitimize a terror organization?
Mm.
And I was very, I went very hard on my social media, going after the mainstream media and saying, do not take Hamas's word for face value. They would say, come on, Gaza Ministry of Health says X, Y, and Z
Yeah.
happen. I'm like, Gaza Ministry of Health is run by Hamas, which, by the way, Sarah, just recently they started saying Hamas run Gaza Ministry of Health. And I,
Yes,
I would like to believe that I played a role in making that difference because I went hard on
you
that. I was
did.
like, you do not trust the word of a terrorist organization. Since when? Since when?
Mhm.
And so I continue to challenge that. I continue to post videos on what I think should be the right move from corporate media. And I hope it's not falling on deaf ears. That's what I hope. But as long as I have a voice, I'm going to use it.
Okay, I want to, the listener, the viewer, this is where I hope everybody has their notepads out because class is in session here at the Do It podcast. And you're learning and you should be hearing the value of quieting the noise, tuning into yourself. And I heard Stella mention one person that she was talking to. I'm sure you talked to your husband too about making the transition. But what I mean is sometimes we don't need 20 people to go to ask permission to make a decision in our life, to make a leap in our life, take a risk in our life. You find your trusted few and you talk to them. And I think that's what you did. I don't hear you saying that you went out to a large group.
No, obviously it was my husband,
Mhm.
obviously it was, my parents, but yeah, just that's about it. And honestly, I couldn't do this without the support of my husband, because it was like, hey babe, I have this wonderful career. I don't feel like I belong in it anymore.
Mm.
And he even noticed that. He would say, I see you coming home, you're sad, you're in your thoughts. I'm like, yeah, because I feel like we're reporting on stuff that doesn't really matter. I'm reporting on, whatever right there. But meanwhile, I have like all these parents who are protesting the school closures and we're not covering it. And I feel like that's not what journalism is. And it was just killing me inside where I'm like, I
Mhm.
feel like I feel like that's why I got into journalism. I feel like that's what brought me here, is to be the voice of the people who are not heard, to be the voice of the voiceless, right? And
Mhm.
never in a million years did I think it would be, parents talking about please open up the schools during COVID lockdowns, whether it was the right thing to do or not. It doesn't matter. I think that their story should have still been told, and I think there were
Mhm.
other stories that should have been told during COVID that were not told. So when so when I was talking to my husband about that, he's like, I can see it. I know you're not happy. And I said, look, I don't know what, my transition is going to look like. I have no idea. But he was like, baby, if this is what you want, I support you. And my sister too, she was always like, what if this is the best decision you make? And she kept saying, just lean into it. Just go lean into it. And that's what I did. And it was the best decision. And you know what? I did lose followers on social
Mhm.
media, but I gained so much more.
Mhm.
I gained people who, are looking for that voice.
Mhm. I mean, there is so much value in the turning off of the noise and asking yourself that simple question. But what if it all works out?
Right.
Because we'll spend hours ruminating on it potentially not working out and all the reasons that it could go bad or all the negative things that had happened. But when we just allow ourselves to shift that perspective and say, but what if we could just consider that it is the best decision I make, or it could all work out? Why is that not just as
I
plausible
because
as the other
right.
one?
because our brain tends to, right,
Yeah.
naturally, think of like negative
Mhm.
things. You honestly don't need 5,000 people to validate you, just like you don't need 5,000 people to say you're amazing and discover you. When I got into journalism, you just need one. You just need
Mhm.
one yes. You just
Mhm.
need one news director to believe in you and say, okay, here's your first job.
It's so
So, no, I mean, really, I
it's
always,
so true.
yeah.
I want to sit with the perspective thing and a little bit more, and I want to talk about the tools that you use to fine tune listening of your gut or your intuition or your compass, because at WIT we're so big on adding tools to your toolkit that you can pull out when you need it. And so when I hear you say that what helped you with your decision was turning to prayer, and I think that's great. If people are listening, that's going to resonate with them and they go, "Oh, that feels good to hear somebody who is successful say that they turn to prayer for guidance." What else do you do? What other things do you do to keep you in tip-top mental shape?
Alone time, when I put my kids to sleep, just to think, to sit with my thoughts, yoga, exercise. I really enjoy, we have like a red light therapy sauna, like the
Oh yeah.
sauna, my thing too, where I sit in there. Again, for some people it's writing it down. Sometimes
Hmm.
I write things down as well. Having that person or people to speak to, deep thoughts, deep
Hmm.
conversations, and knowing that you can trust these people and they're not going to
Hmm.
judge you. Those are the things that I use. But for me, really, it's prayer. It really, that's where I'm at.
I love that because I think that's something that we don't always hear people share out loud, and I think that's going to really resonate with some of our listeners and viewers, and validate that that's a tool for them as they navigate their life. Okay, let's jump into. We're going to switch gears just a little bit. I want to talk to you about current events, but listener, don't worry, we're not going into like her hot take on current events and hot topics. That's not what we're doing here, because just like when I ran a traditional classroom, I think it's so important that young people have spaces that they can go to where they can uh, hear different viewpoints or hear things and not draw the conclusion of what the teacher is thinking. Or let me say it more bluntly. When I was a teacher, nobody knew who I was voting for when it came down for an election, because I really wanted young people to hear different sides and draw
Mhm.
the conclusions that they wanted, and not be so influenced by an adult, because there's so much power when you're an adult or when you're in a position of power, significance, to sway people. And I think it's really important in education and as a teacher that you don't do that in your classroom, and you take that responsibility seriously. And it's my opinion that with what you're doing and the platform that you have, you're trying to just show both sides of something. Because if one media outlet is only showing one thing, you're saying that's not what journalism is supposed to be. We're supposed to be presenting both sides. So what about these young people that are out there trying to find the right places to get their current events?
I think it's important to use multiple tools, right? If I had to give advice to younger people of where to get their media from, go various outlets. Get your stuff from CNN, but also listen to Fox News. Get your stuff from CBS, ABC, but also listen to One America News and Newsmax, because none of them are providing the full picture. Because what's
Hmm.
happening is, when you're having the mainstream media, they're going one side, and you have like, the other side trying to balance it, so they're giving the other
Hmm.
side, right?
Hmm.
So in order to find out where you stand, you watch it and you can come to your own decision. So I think it's really, really important.
Do you think that they should care? Do you think that young people should care about current events and what's going on?
Absolutely. But you know what? When I was like, in my 20s, like, things that I cared about then, didn't care about then, I care about now. It's like, why do I care about mortgage rates if I'm 16 or 17 or 18, right? But it
Right.
kind of shapes the economy, where we are, and
Hmm.
it's really important. And then it's like, okay, well, why do I care about inflation when my parents are paying for my insurance, my health
Hmm.
insurance? But you kind of get to understand things more, what the administration is doing. It gives you a bigger picture of what is happening in our economy. um, but I think to know the world events, it just makes you a smarter person too. I think when you start realizing, like, instead of, we're seeing all these, protests like from the river to the sea, which has become so popular, that chant, right? And then
Mhm.
you see a lot of young people posting about it. It's like, do you even know what you're saying? Like, it sounds cool. You think that you're saying that Israel is, committing a genocide, which it's not. But like, do you actually know what river to the sea means? Like, from what river to what sea? From the
Mhm.
Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, obviously. And from the river to the sea means to eradicate Israel, which means where are all those people going to go? So
Mhm.
just something as little as that, when you actually put in real context, I think it's really, really important.
I agree, and I also think it's hard for young people. I think it's hard to, I don't think it should be, but I'm noticing it because that's the demographic that I work with, that when you are somebody who cares so much, right? I think that when you're younger, I mean, I think when we're older, you care too, and you're empathetic as well. But I just mean young people really a lot of times just like lead with their hearts, right? They're just
Right.
and you're quick to you're seeing that there's something was somebody was wronged and you jump on it. And it's just that now, I mean, I'm older, but like back in the day, you couldn't jump on things so fast because you didn't have access to so much information all the time. You didn't
Right.
always know what was going on. And now you can just latch onto something really quick. And I have to think that the people that are doing that, they're not bad people. There's something in them that thinks that they're taking the quote right approach and that they are being empathetic. What do you say to that person about discernment? I mean, I know you said like get your media from different places. What about surrounding yourself with people that have different viewpoints? Because I
Well,
don't see that as much anymore.
and it's hard, right? Because put ourselves in that situation. Like, you
Hmm.
and I grew up with TikTok, so I don't. I mean,
Yeah.
at least I can be like, wow, I can't believe this video is going viral. There's nothing factual in this video, but I
Hmm.
think younger people should be asking questions. Okay, well, I got this video on TikTok. Like, who is this person, and why is this person saying that? And maybe do a little bit more research
Hmm.
on why this is becoming so popular. Because yeah, if you're younger and you want to be sympathetic and you're like, oh my god, it's so horrible, like what is happening in Gaza and Israel is bad, bad, bad. But if you go and you start researching the history and you start seeing what happened, is it's very deep. It's not just Israel, it's not just the Palestinians. Oh, by the way, did you know Iran is involved? Oh,
Hmm.
do you know why Iran is involved? So there's so much depth to this story. And it's not just that story, it's many different stories where
Hmm.
there's layers and you have to question them. And I think it's important to, like I said, it goes back to getting your news from various different outlets,
Hmm.
because you can't just rely on one source anymore. That we used to be able to, right? Like, even I look at the reporting that used to happen, even like on Israel, it was very different, the reporting, and now it's all of a sudden taken a turn. And I know why that is, because
Hmm.
EI, but that's a whole different layer. So you have to start digging and asking the right questions of, well, why is all this, why is all of a sudden Israel a bad guy, and what is this 75 years of occupation? Well, no, because if you actually did your research, you realize that you know the Jewish people belonged to the land of Israel 2,000 years before there was Islam.
Hmm.
So there's just so much history, and you have, and this the movement that is happening right now, the anti-Israel movement, is very scary. It's very, very scary. And I say the Jewish people are just the canary in the coal mine. There's somebody next once they get to what they want to get to. So we have to be very careful about what we're doing and what we're agreeing with and the stuff that we're consuming as young adults, because it's very, very important.
And also look around the world as well. Don't just pay attention to the stories that are trending. Look deeper because there are plenty of things that are happening around the world
Syria.
that, yeah, I was going to say.
Right. There's Bashar al-Assad has killed hundreds of thousands of Syrians, and you don't hear about the protests.
Mhm.
There was a massacre in Nigeria on Christmas where hundreds of Christians were massacred. Oh, in South Africa is bringing a genocidal case against Israel. Did you know that South Africa just met with leaders of Hamas, and they have been very tight? So could this be a money trail? Could this be like there's so much more to this. So you can't just take it at face value. Again, you have to start researching and going, what is going on here?
Mhm.
I think I want to ask a little bit more, and do it. Ask it. You'll get the answer. Eventually you'll get to it. You follow people like me, you follow people like you know, that's why, social media is a blessing and it's a curse.
Mhm. And it's also just, I want to say to everyone, be willing to be wrong too,
Yeah.
because sometimes we go out with an opinion and a mindset, and then we go gather all the information to support that, because you can find it. I also would say try to challenge yourself if you're feeling too stuck or rigid in a perspective. It's really good to just challenge yourself by asking questions or listening to somebody with a different perspective. I mean, it's obvious to me, Stella, like what your friends were saying, that you were always asking questions, because
Yeah.
how even how you answer the question is the questions.
Right.
Like,
Because,
and
like,
inviting us to ask ourselves the questions. And I think that's so good. And a wonderful takeaway for our listener and viewer is like, where are you asking questions versus sitting around in your own echo chambers, or whether you are talking at people? Where are you asking questions? And where could you ask a question today to challenge a belief that you might have? I think that would be really helpful. I want to bring in as you know, every episode we bring in a young adult or teenager, someone who has either been part of the WIT program or is currently part of the WIT program, but a young entrepreneur, because this podcast, while we know there's a range of ages that listen to it, it's also supposed to serve as a place and space for young people to use their voice. There's not enough classrooms in this world where young people get to be the leader in that in the classroom. And at WIT, we want to make sure we pass the mic literally. So I'm going to turn it over to Charlotte Waserman, who is the founder of It's a Girl's Life, and she can take it away.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's been a while since I've never been able to like ask questions during an interview like this before, but I've been on the podcast before, so it's really fun to be coming back.
Mhm.
And it's such an honor to be able to ask you some questions. But I think what I want to really ask you about first is with anti-Semitism, just because that's so relevant and it's been something that I've been thinking a lot about. Um, and I just kind of wanted to ask you how you suggest young people to stand up to it in today's world and with everything that's happening, especially when there's a lot of like news outlets, as you touched on, but also institutions and colleges and schools have been getting involved in the situation as well, which is particularly hard considering that I'm in college right now. And just a lot of public sharing of views that aren't always supportive of what's happening. I just think that's really hard for a young person to kind of like decipher through. So I was wondering what your advice is.
Do you know who you are? Like, do you know to your core who you are?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do.
So that's really important. Um, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to stand up for what's right. There's a lot of gaslighting going on right now. And there's a lot of people being really loud on one side that want to shut us up. So when I say, do you know who you are? Do you know who your people are? Do we know who we are? Do not be afraid. And being in college may be tough right now, but join those groups that are like-minded like you and take a stance, because they're only going to get louder. And, it's no secret, I'm Jewish. I'm fighting this anti-Semitism situation with you right now, but I couldn't be more prouder. The louder they get, the louder we will get. We don't have to use the same tactics, but we have to continue to stand up for what's right, because what's happening is we're playing catch up right now. We're like, no, 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 no. This is false. We have to go out there and we have to create our own campaigns. We have to dispel the myths that are being said about us. Do not feel like you have to be quiet because the other side is so loud. Okay, don't do that, because we know who we are. The Jewish people have been through this before. This is not our first time. It's our first time in our generation, right? Like, and for me, but we will get through this. I promise you. It's going to be a long fight, and you have to be proud. Do not hide. I mean, if you're scared, I get it, but don't hide your Jewish star. Don't hide your faith. This is who we are. We're not going anywhere. I'm sorry to say, as much as they'd like us to go away and for Israel to be from the river to the sea, it's not happening and we're not going away. So, what I would say is just find like minded people and join together and find ways to get campaigns going to fight the misinformation that is being said.
I really like that response. I really like when you said to like stand up to the voices even when they're really loud. So I think that's like when it gets particularly very intimidating for young people, but I think that's not like a sign for people to not say anything at all.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for your response and giving people who are listening to that like permission to be able to stand up and say something. I think that's really important, especially when that's not always being talked about or broadcasted.
Let me say something. You don't need my permission. You already know who you are. Okay. That's why I asked you, do you know who you are? Yes. Do you know who the Jewish people are? Yes. That's all you need to know. You don't need my permission. You know in your heart what is right. And just do that thing that feels right.
Got it. I will
Yeah.
do. I have another question that's similar but kind of on a different topic as well. Why do you think the bigger news outlets and like those channels aren't choosing to show the truth between like the war that's happening, but also other events that are very controversial or seem controversial?
It becomes a political thing. So, I have been very outspoken on DEI. Do you know what DEI is? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well,
Mhm.
diversity, equity, and inclusion has really seeped into newsrooms. And the dangers of DEI when it comes to Israel, DEI teaches that, Israel is the oppressor and the Palestinians are the brown and black people, which couldn't be further from the truth because Iraqi Jews, Iranian Jews, um, Egyptian Jews, I mean, you name it, Lebanese, wherever. I mean, Ethiopian Jews, like, are those not brown and black people? So anyway, in my opinion, I think what's happened is DI has seeped so deep into our newsrooms because let's face it, a lot of newsrooms are young people nowadays. Okay. So what happens is they're coming out of these colleges, these universities that teach them DEI, and they bring that thought back into the newsrooms, and the newsrooms already have their own DEI policies, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they're covering certain stories from a different perspective that doesn't necessarily actually align with the entire country. So you get a lot of people saying like, why did you cover this story from this angle? Why did you know what I'm saying? So it's like,
Right.
it's, like during the George Floyd riots, um, in California, we had lockdowns, right? Like
Right.
I was working from home, we were working from home. But when the riots happened, it was like we had reporters that were just like sent out. And I'm like, wait, I thought there's COVID. Like, aren't we gonna get COVID? And it was like, oh, it's okay. It's a national emergency. We make exceptions for this. That's when I was like, whoa, something doesn't seem right. And that for me, and I'm speaking for myself, was DEI. Like, because it disregarded like what the whole nation was talking about to talk about racism in America.
Mhm.
And now it was okay to go out there on the streets when, I'm sorry, like I can't go to a supermarket without, standing 6 feet from somebody. And these people were this close to each other and rioting and protesting.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it sounds like it's very complicated beyond just like the surface level of what's going on. And it seems like there's a lot of like changing situations based on what's happening, and making different statements to stand because of different things.
That's why it's so important. Yeah, that's why it's so important to gather your news from different outlets. I mean, listen, somebody like yourself, you live on your phone, right? So you
Yeah.
can easily
Mhm.
read articles and educate yourself. And I think it's important, once you find something that's really interesting, share it with your like-minded friends. And even if they're not like-minded at the time, maybe you can, educate others as well.
And allow
I really
yourself to
like
be, oh,
that.
wait, real quick, sure. I was going to just add on here. Allow yourself to be irritated by somebody's perspective. So like if there's somebody listening right now and you've heard things or you're watching and you've heard things that maybe you don't agree with, that's fine. That's fine. You're allowed to do that. You just have to ask yourselves why. Why do you not? And then be honest with yourself as to why. And then gather your own research, get your own information. reach out to have a conversation, go into the DMs of Stella or to Charlotte or to me and share a perspective if you think that is something, if you have a different viewpoint or you want to be in a conversation. What I'm just seeing over and over again is the lack of conversation and more people just shutting people out and pushing people away and only surrounding themselves with people who think exactly how they think. Although I also will say, I think it's really important to be around like-minded people. So I go back and forth with that. But if you want to be a well-educated, well-rounded person, you must understand different points of view. And it's easy to believe what you want to believe, right? I mean, you don't have to challenge yourself. But if you're hearing, Stella say something about something, ask yourself, well, were you even living in California during the time that she was living in California? Because I know when I was in California during the lockdown, and it was very different because I went to go to Tennessee during that time, and I went to go to Florida during that time. What was happening in those states was very different than what those of us that were in California were experiencing. And so when somebody comes to me, because I'll have some very strong viewpoints on what happened during that time, and somebody will push back on me, I just ask them, where were you? And if you weren't living then in that state in the state at that time, I don't know how much of I know I lived it. Right. It's lived experience. And so just take that into every area of your life. If you're having a strong reaction to somebody saying something, ask yourself, why am I having that reaction? Or maybe why would they be having it? Maybe it's lived experience. And if somebody has lived experience, even if you don't really want to hear it, challenge yourself to listen to them. Have them elaborate on it, because lived experience is very valuable, and it's how we learn, not just by reading the books about something happening. But when I hear a student sharing this,
I love what you just said. So I've been, actively covering the Israel-Hamas war, and there's a journalist on the ground there. He's got hundreds of thousands of followers, and he posted something, and I responded to one of his stories, and he wrote back to me, and I was like, whoa, wow. So we went back and forth, and we talked for an hour because I really want to know, like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you reporting these things? If you say XYZ, then why isn't XYZ happening? And it was so eye-opening to me. Like, I would say, listen, 85% of the Palestinians agree with Hamas. He's like, that's not true. It's only 5%. I said, well, if it's only 5%, then why are your stories, not reporting the humanitarian aid that's being stolen? Or why aren't you putting on your stories like people saying, like, free us from Hamas? This is a terrorist organization. And he contradicted himself all along the way. But it gave me a good perspective of like, I see how you're looking at all of this. And it's definitely very pro-Hamas. And these are people who are considered the press there. Just because I want to know, like, even me, when I have a perspective on something, I go to an alternate site just to see what they're saying, because I really want to know what they're thinking. Because if you live solely in your own echo chamber, that's the worst thing you can do. But anyway, so I had this interesting conversation, and we went back and forth, and I could just tell. I knew exactly how they feel and what they think, and it didn't seem like it was about the land, and it felt very much about just the Jewish people. And I was like, okay, I got my answer straight from there.
Also, don't let people like box you up. I mean, I think and then try not to box people up. I mean, that's I think is a really important thing, because sometimes people could say, let's just say someone's hearing Charlotte asking about what's happening around anti-Semitism. And then all of a sudden they think, just because Charlotte asked that question, this means all these other things about her. Or just because Stella makes a comment about California lockdowns means that you know everything else about her. Right. I think it's really important that, I know it can feel, and this is to the listener and the viewer, that there's something easy when you can put people in the box, because then you don't have to think about it anymore. Then you kind of like check it like, oh, I've got Sarah figured out. So it's easy now that I know she must be thinking about all these things. That is not the way to live. The way to live is, okay, I don't like that Sarah just said that, but maybe I should lead in and do the Stella move of being inquisitive and ask follow-up questions, and then maybe you'll be surprised. Although that said, you might be proven right. But I think we're boxing people up too fast, and that's why
I'd say two things can be true at the same time.
yes, you can hold two things at the same time. Yeah.
I say that all the time. Me and one of my good friends talk about this all the time. She's like, why, if I believe in this, do people think I automatically believe in this? No, I believe in people's rights for X, Y, and Z, but I also believe in this. You know what I'm saying? And yes, we're so quick to throw people in a box, and it's unfair. We again, two things can be true at the same time.
There's so much power in the word "and." So try to use it more and have that word in the toolbox. If it can be this, you can feel this, and you can feel this. You can believe people have the rights to this, and you can also believe that these people should have more rights. You don't get to just put everybody in a box because it's comfortable for you and easy for you, and then you can skip along and go, see, I was right. That's how she is. Right. That's how they, or that the famous, like, that's how they are. Like, you're grouping a whole group of people together and making an assumption. So Charlotte, I want to turn it over to you for more questions. I got a little animated there.
I really like that what you're saying about, living in like the gray space, because I think that's something that's really hard for a lot of kids right now to feel and come to terms with. That's really important, and to also like not know what the answer is in mind. And sometimes you're not searching for an answer at all. You're just kind of searching to learn more about what's going on. I think it's really important to share about, considering there's so many different avenues of how things can result, and there isn't really an answer. Especially because that's something that I feel like I'm just like personally uncomfortable with sometimes, is like not having an answer. But I think that's really important for something that young people should be like working on, and valuing both sides of every story, considering that like having more information than not will always make a certain argument stronger, I feel like. So learning about every single different viewpoint is always more important than just sticking with one. But my other question is, how do you suggest and advise young people to work with other people, but also respond to other people who you think might not be seeing the full picture? I know you talked a lot about how, you have to like really put yourself in other people's shoes, which I think is really important. And you never know what people have been experiencing that have led them to think the way that they are thinking. But sometimes I feel like it's very frustrating when I go online and I know that like maybe it's like some quote unquote like well-known TikTok or like Instagram celebrity that I know is being fed information, and then just reporting on that, and then a bunch of young people in like the comments are commenting about it like, oh my gosh, yes, like this is so important, so true. But then I'm like, I could tell she's just being fed a certain agenda, and that's really upsetting.
You're never going to be able to take on somebody who has like 5 million
followers.
I knew that. I can't take on Bella and Gigi Hadid, but what you can do is you can create your own platform to teach people what is right. That is my whole thing, is it's like going on there and commenting, it just goes in the wind, and it's like, okay, whatever. And you might get all this like spam and blah, blah, blah. It's like, all of us, we troll the internet and we say this, but really it falls on deaf ears. What I have chosen to do is use my own platform to create that different environment for people and for like-minded individuals who follow and believe me in that topic, because I don't think that somebody with 20 million followers really cares what you're going to say. It's just, it is what it is. But what you can do is you can, like I said, create your own following and start your own information and teaching your friends who teach. Like if you have a friend who could teach one friend who can then teach one friend, it makes a difference. I always say little by little makes a bundle. You know what I'm saying? So it all eventually adds up. Because I have people who follow me who are like, I never really understood this whole, Israel Hamas Palestinian thing going on, but thank you so much for educating me, and I've now been able to, make my own decision.
You can also unsubscribe from people and unfollow.
You
can also just follow. And Charlotte, it also can be disappointing because you might have somebody, maybe it's a celebrity, maybe it's a TikTok star, maybe it's somebody that you've looked up to, or they've been a part of your teenage journey, right? Like you watched their movies or you admired them, and then all of a sudden they say something that really it hurts you. That's okay
Yeah.
too. They also aren't there for you. Like, meaning like they're not there to live what's right for you. They're not there to be your puppet either, that they have to have a viewpoint that only supports how you exist. It's where we start to practice discernment. Who do we want to surround ourselves with? What perspectives do we want to let in? How much time do we want to spend scrolling? And also asking yourself, why did I put a complete stranger on a pedestal?
Exactly. I was just about to say that. Like why does it matter?
Good point.
It's disappointing. Like I've been there where I follow people, influencers and whatever, and I'm like, well, that was disappointing. Unfollow.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. You know what I mean? I'm like, maybe I'll check in a couple of years. Maybe, you know, we'll agree on something. Not right now. We don't.
And that's fine.
It's a good point.
And I love that we've had this conversation, and I want to respect Stella has a hard stop right now. I'm going to keep Charlotte on to chat a little bit, but I want to say thank you to Stella for coming to class today, coming to the DeWitt classroom. And I'm sure there's people listening and watching that are head nodding and in agreement, and some that are annoyed and irritated. And that's great.
That's okay.
That's great. Let that happen.
I say this to people all the time that, you know, come into my DMs who don't agree with me. I said, listen, we can agree to disagree.
And I really want to say thank you for reminding all of everyone that's listening and watching that it's so important to turn off the noise, go inside, and invite yourself to get uncomfortable, take the risks, the career moves that you've made. I know we're not easy because I've made some myself, so I can put myself in your shoes a bit. And I also want to say that the reminder to do what is right for you versus what other people in the outside world think could be right for you is so important. 100%. You make choices to say no to some of the things that were shiny and bright, and yes to something that was more in alignment with your intuition, your values, your gut. And I think that's a wonderful takeaway for anybody who's listening and watching. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll see you next time.
Yeah. See you soon.
Okay.
Bye.
All right. Charlotte, thanks for coming on the podcast and for being our youth voice. Although, I mean, how old are you now?
20.
So, I mean, she's not even, she's gone from being the teen in WIT to now the young adult in college. What year are you now?
I'm a sophomore.
A sophomore in college. Okay. So this podcast, the Do It podcast, is for your younger self, right? Your teenage self because you're part of this podcast back then. It's also for your 20-something self. And when you think about what you just experienced by having the chance to ask those questions and also to listen, what are some of your takeaways for your 20-year-old self?
I think I need to do a lot more reading of any type of news and every type of news. I feel like sometimes it's really hard that I get stuck in well, actually, I think that's a new thing coming to college. Well, at home, when I was in high school, the news was always on. So I was able to really stay in touch with it. And it was a big part of the dinner table. So that could have just been a family thing or pretty much just a family thing because you're so impacted by what your family says. And it was definitely a lot of listening to one-sided news, but then we were also told to consider all types of news and things like that. So it's just getting that narrative was definitely really impactful on my years at home. However, now that I have been at college, I have the chance to really be my independent self. But that means that I need to take responsibility for myself as well and what I am listening to and educating myself. And make time to listen to what's going on in the world, because if you don't listen to what's going on, even though you should spend time to listen to yourself and what you care about, then you won't know. And being uneducated is equally a very scary thing. So I think I need to take it on myself to be a little bit more independent and have the responsibility of paying attention to what's happening, especially since I find it really interesting and really important to me. And so that's one thing. And then I realized equally another thing is just being independent of what you think about and not always turning to people on I don't really even like to really turn to people on social media to tell me what to think, but it happens because you go
Sure.
on it and you hear something and it's just bound to happen. And I
Mhm.
think it's really important to be reminded that, those people can say whatever they want, but that they're not supposed to be telling you what to think. Uh, and they have their own things they're going through.
Totally.
So there was a lot of takeaways just thinking about people and what they have to say that I took
Mhm.
uh, as very important. And I realized,
I liked her question to you about, do you know who you are?
yeah, me too.
I liked that.
Especially because I think that I mean, I guess I've never really asked myself that
Mhm.
most recently. And sometimes I feel like I've been thinking about a lot of different things that have been happening and have been like changing or making me question like who I think I am.
Mm,
But I think realizing that I do know who I am is really important because it kind of made me think about and become more confident in what I think about
mhm.
things that are happening. And I just haven't really took time to consider that at all recently. Just kind of weird.
Well, I think that there's, as you say that, it makes me think, it makes sense that you're going to go through different versions of yourself, right? That's
Yes.
just normal. I mean, you think about even things that my career path and where I've lived, friends that I've had, friends that I thought I'd be best friends with forever that I don't even talk to anymore. So those things change. But I think the idea or the question about like knowing who you are really comes down to what we've talked about at WIT with our values and what do we stand for? Because then circumstances around us are going to change. Um, Boyfriends, girlfriends will come and go. Things will happen within a family. Things will happen at school or happen at work. But if we know what we stand for in our core values, that helps us, I think, navigate those things. And but of course you're going to change. Of course you could go through, I
Right.
mean, I went through a phase where I was a vegetarian and now I love eating meat. So like that's a silly example that I just thought off the top of my head, but that who I, that happens. Those kinds of changes happen. But who we are, I think, uh, I think you know that. I think you know who you are and what you stand for. And I say that because just to remind the listener and the viewer, I know I've known Charlotte for a long time, although I haven't seen her in a while, so it's nice to connect with her. But always good to question what you stand for, what you believe, and either adjust or dig deeper and lay that foundation even stronger because I think that's so important and so normal, especially in the early 20s. I always say travel, travel, travel as much as you can because getting out into the world and realizing that there's a lot of things happening out there in the world and not everybody has the same talking points of what's going on. And when you go out and you explore and you meet people and you get involved in different cultures and different communities, you do start to see that we have more in common than not, for sure.
True.
And you do realize that the more you get off your phone, the better it is for your mental health when you're engaging with people face to face and having conversations because some of us, whether we even are aware of it or not, we are fed certain talking points
True.
and then we want to go off and just talk about those and that's all top of mind. But is it top of mind because we chose it to be top of mind or because the community around us is telling us this is what we should be talking about and thinking about? And that's why I always say travel and travel outside your countries if you can, or even your communities. Or I've taken road trips across the country, and it's really interesting as somebody who splits time West Coast, South, and sometimes the East Coast, seeing those in between states and learning how people live and what's on their mind and on their hearts is really important. And I think what I hope people get from you is the reminder. Their takeaway would be like the reminder to be broadening your where you're getting your information, or maybe even Charlotte getting away from it and
Yeah.
and diving into something of in the community or going into a different community and learning about something. Maybe that's it too. Maybe you don't
Yeah, I
have
think
to,
it's
maybe you don't
just,
have to keep consuming. Maybe you don't have to keep consuming. Maybe that's not the call to action.
I think it's a little, I definitely think it's a mix of both because sometimes I think I don't consume the right information at all. Like I'm just kind of like avoiding that there's like bigger issues happening in
Mhm.
the world that I think I should probably know more about and have more of an opinion on things. Um, but then I think it's really like leaning into those connections and relationships you have with you to hear about how they think about it because it's
Mhm.
always sometimes a little bit different, but it's still like that's one of the really exciting things I was very excited about going to college and going to a state where I'm from Ohio and going to a school that's infiltrated by a lot of people from California and Florida and Texas
Mhm.
people. I was just more interested in hearing about all the different experiences people had, um, and how they grew up and learning about kind of like
Mhm.
how that kind of takes them to how they think about the world.
Mhm.
Because even though, as you said, there's a lot of similarities, I think it's just really interesting to like piece things together,
Mhm.
and take away everything to kind of understand how they've gotten to what they think about now type thing.
I also think it's always a good reminder. I mean, if we want to see more empathy, understanding, compassion in the world, or even in our community, we get to decide if we're showing and demonstrating those qualities in our immediate life for the people that we're around. Are we showing the compassion, empathy, understanding to those around us that we want to get in return? And
I agree.
that's always good. I mean, I think I always want to put us back in our own driver's seat, put us back in the position of like we have so much power right now within ourselves versus waiting for everybody else around us to change, adjust, think how I want them to think, how we want them to think. Uh, we get to be reminded that we are in charge of ourselves and we can go back to um, stay there, stay in that lane of when it comes to navigating life. And obviously, we dove into it. We didn't really dive into it a lot with Stella, but she's obviously very entrepreneurial because she's navigated her career. You know, she's done these different jobs within the field of journalism, but definitely living with an entrepreneurial mindset when it comes to taking risks and leaving big name stations to go to smaller stations or to leave smaller stations to go to a different state that's best for her family or her husband. And it makes me think about how important it is if we're going to, not all of us are going to be entrepreneurs, but we can all live with an entrepreneurial mindset. And that is being flexible in our thoughts, being willing to take risk. And what else? What else would you say to our listener? Because you're an entrepreneur and you have
Mm,
your own thing. It's a girl's life. And we'll tag all that in this episode. But what do you think it means to live with an entrepreneurial mindset?
I think being resilient despite challenges that are going to
Mhm.
arise, because challenges always do arise.
Mhm.
And sometimes they can all different areas of your life can have challenges that all arise at the same time. But knowing that that's where you're going to learn the most
Mhm.
because it's going to be something that's uncomfortable and maybe you least expected it, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't supposed to happen at the right time.
That sounds like something you already live with. You do live with.
But I
Look
still
at
think
that.
it's a good reminder
It
because
is. It's a good reminder
sometimes I
to,
forget.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good
Just
reminder
a
to
reminder to
me.
myself. Yeah.
It's a good reminder. So to our listener and our viewer, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Do It podcast. I'm so grateful that you spent time with us in our WIT class today. And just remember to keep doing WIT.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was such a nice time to catch up and also hear about her story and everything. It was really inspirational.
Thanks for being here.